Welcome to our next unit. Welcome to cultural geography. We go from that to religion, or from language to religion. Welcome to all those currently taking my class or those from previous classes who want a little refresher before the exam. I'm always here. We're going to look at what culture is. We're going to look at what it means to possess culture. What are the factors that develop culture? When you stop and think about it. The units we spoke of previously, the geography itself, the importance of the land, the ability to feed ourselves and what that means, and then how the access to food alters our moving habits, or how the access to resources alters who moves and why we move. So when we think of that, other than not dying, we begin to realize that certain areas have certain things that are necessary for us to survive. And as we stay in one place long enough, certain things will begin to come into play that define who we are as individuals. When we think about the people from Mesopotamia slowly becoming Persian, and then Arabian, and then Syrian, or what does it mean to be French, or what does it mean to be American, which is probably the most difficult thing to answer. And hopefully by the end of this unit, we'll have an answer to that, what it actually means to be American. So let's go ahead and begin discussing culture. Now, this unit is 3 chapters long. This unit is 3 different parts. The first part is culture itself. We'll look at what it means. We'll look at popular and folk culture. The next part of the unit is language, and then religion. And all of these tie together. All of these are byproducts of people living in one area, in one geographic location for a specific over a particular amount of time. Also remember, as we keep doing this, that if you need to pause to write stuff down, if you need to pause or rewind to go back and get anything I say, which may be examples or anything else, the beauty of this is that you can pause it. Our primary focus right now is these. These are the 2 things with which we are concerned for this chapter in this unit. The other things are important. We'll get to them. But I'm fairly certain you'll see this chart again, so don't feel obligated to write it all down. All right. Again, we're going to be looking at the introduction to culture, folk culture, and popular culture. This is our Unit 1 outline. So let's just figure out what culture is, shall we? All right. Whoops. All right. Introduction to culture. Again, we're going to look at what it is. We're going to look at what cultures are made of. We're going to look at where culture comes from. And then how do we adapt to culture, or is it the other way around? Do we shape culture, or do the humans shape culture? Does mankind develop its own culture, or do our surroundings play a larger role in that? And again, as with all things in human geography, it is relative and it is scalable. The culture of your house, the culture of your friend group, perhaps, the culture of a school, of a city, and all the way up to a country. I don't know if we could make the stretch to planetary culture until we actually start talking to other planets. But this is what we're going to look at this unit. All right. So what is culture? Let's just get to the point since we're not here. In Latin, it comes from cultura, which means to cultivate. And to cultivate, as you all know, means to develop, to raise, to grow. So it's something that grows. It is organic, I guess, is one way to look at it. Culture comes from our situation. So that is where it comes from. So if you want to take a minute and come up with your own definition of culture, that would be great. We can share them in Canvas at a later date. I'll ask the question at some point, and then you guys can tell me what you came up with. Culture is the mix of values, beliefs, behaviors, and material objects that make a people's way of life. They are everything about us that makes us who we are. They are what we believe. They are what we fear. They are what we value. They are what we make. There are 2 types of culture that we'll get to later on in the unit, material culture and non-material culture. But they are everything about us that make us who we are. That is culture. And again, it's one of the more difficult questions to answer when talking about what it means to be American and what is American culture. Um, I think it's much easier to say, well, what is Southern culture? And even then, you can break it down. Which part of the South, which state. So when you look at these broad terms like culture, like values and beliefs, think about how specific they are, and yet at the same time, how general they are. The countries that you own, perhaps, you could think about their cultures, what they grow, what does that say about their culture, things of that sort. Again, if we had time, we would describe the culture of our classroom, our school, our town, and our state. We're not in the room together. We're not lecturing live. But again, you should be able to stop, write those down, and think about the previous slide and think about the values, the norms associated with my classroom. Like, what was the culture of the classroom? What is the culture of Sanderson? What is the culture of the town of Raleigh? What is the culture of North Carolina? And again, you can even take it more micro, and go and look at what's the culture of your family, and take whether extended family down to your immediate, your nuclear family. So it varies, and it paints you can paint it with a broad brush, but at the end of the day, the certain things are relative to all sizes. The things that make a classroom a culture are the same types of things that describe a school's culture or a town's culture. So again, it's all just scalable. All right. Any questions? Ask them Monday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, or Friday. How do we study culture? It's an excellent question. Probably the best way is to observe it. Sociology is the scientific approach of looking at culture. You look at how groups behave amongst themselves and between others. It's always a good thing. We look at cultural geography, pardon my picture, cultural landscape, that's behind my picture, and then cultural ecology. And again, you know what geography is, and you understand how geography impacts culture. If you go back to our first unit, heck, even our second unit when dealing with agriculture, where they lived, where those crops grew, and where those crops were successfully grown, dictated what you ate. Cultural landscape is a little different. There are two types. There's a natural landscape, and then there's a built landscape, and that's what we actually do to modify an environment. And then there's cultural ecology, which is just the relationship between man and the natural world, and how those things interplay with what, again, we value, or what means to what are the things that mean to a certain group of people. So those are the three ways we look at culture, and those are the ways that we'll continue to look at culture as we progress through this unit. Again, cultural geography, our first stop on the way. Remember, pause if you need to. All right, it's the study of how and why cultures vary over space. So why is it? Why is it that Asia, the continent of Asia, is Asia, and yet at the same time, to confuse a Japanese citizen or a person of Japanese culture to a Korean or to Chinese or to Laotian is a slur? Why is it that Asia is huge, and yet we don't consider Iranians, Iraqis, and Syrians Asian? But how and why cultures vary over space? Why is it that people look different? Why is it that people speak a different language? Why is it that certain religions work in one place and not somewhere else? Why is it progress is viewed differently? All those things, a cultural geographer will look at how the land itself, the geography itself, impacts how that occurs. Does that make sense? What is cultural landscape? And again, I hinted at this earlier. Cultural landscape are the places that reveal our identity through nature, as well as through architecture and artifacts. Again, using Pixar and using Disney because they work. Moana their people were environmental determinists. Keeping the gods happy and being able to grow their coconuts was imperative. At the same time, the coconut and those gods become a part of their cultural identity and their cultural makeup. They used to be, I believe the word was travelers. I'll forget, and when I'm wrong, someone will correct me. When these things get posted in YouTube, when these things get posted on my on Canvas and then on my YouTube channel, if you have questions, heck, send them there. But they used to be voyagers, and now they aren't. They stay put, and that's because the geography kind of dictated that to them. When you think of various structures in Southwest Asia, or the Native American houses in New Mexico, the Pueblos and things like that, they use what was available. They use the geography and they use the materials on hand, and that becomes part of what they are. So that's what cultural landscapes mean. Excuse me. It's looking at the land itself and how does the land itself sort of influence the people living there, and then at the same time, how did the people take that land, take the trees or the earth or whatever, and use that and make that part of their culture. There are 4 types of cultural landscapes that we'll get to. One is a design landscape. This is the Vatican in Rome. This is designed, full vision in mind. It's designed specifically. There's a specific goal in mind. It's to serve a specific purpose. This is a design landscape. This is definitely a built landscape. It is not naturally occurring, obviously, and there's a purpose for it. Again, I like using, if you can think of any examples, that would be great. My favorite example is Paris. In Paris, the streets are very wide, and they're wide on purpose because, and I've said this before, because they did not want to have a Les Mis part 2. Part 2. So the streets are very wide to make them more difficult to barricade. That's a design landscape. That's well thought out. It's so well thought out that the designer of Paris went and designed Washington, D.C. So here's a little fun fact for you. Vernacular landscape, I was talking about Pueblos a second ago. This is a landscape that comes about through the use of people over time. So again, living here, they not a lot of wood, not a lot of lumber. Notice these are adobe or brick houses. Also notice that the egress to these houses is on the roof or on the second floor. There's staircases going up, there's ladders going up. And so you need to think about, and take a second and think about this now, what are some of the reasons for the ladders? Well, not for the ladders, but why is the entrance to these dwellings off the ground? Why is it on the second floor, or maybe, since we can't see, through the roof? What would be some of the reasons, based on the geography, based on the landscape, that would be necessary? And these are things we need to think about. They are making do with what they have, so why not? So, I mean, there are a number of things that you could think of perhaps as to why this occurs the way it does. So now if you think about it, do so. And then think of any other situations, or if you can think of any other types of structures or housings or behaviors where they are done in response to, because that's what this is. This is a response to the environment. So just, when you have a second, think about that. Historic sites. This is important to a particular group of people. Again, this is relevant to a particular group. Something happened here that marks who they are as a people, or significant in their history, or because it's all scalable to you. You have historic sites that are part of your makeup, that make up who you are as a person, and your family. That the place you go on vacation, or that one place where that one event happened where the uncle did this or that. I don't know. But Disney World, or that family vacation, just things that happen that become part of the cultural makeup at any level, at any size, any scalability. These are historic sites. They matter. This is Gettysburg, kind of important. So that's the third type. And then the fourth type is ethnographic landscapes. Now these are natural and cultural resources, and they are important to a certain group. Again, the Ganges River, serves two purposes. It's waterway, it's travel, it's goods and services. It's also a sacred river. It is important to their faith and to their belief. The Ganges has, for lack of a better term, mythic powers. It is responsible and is important in their lives in two different ways. It's not just a river. It's more than a river, and that's ethnographic. That speaks to ethnic groups and much more of a personal and much more of a different groups can see the same thing differently, which I think is the most important part of this. So when you start thinking about other places, other examples when you're taking your exams or when you're answering questions in the study guides or when you're asked anything, when you're watching the news, which I hope you have been, why does that river matter to these people and not these people? Why do those mountains matter so much? So there are reasons for this, and this is all within the confines of culture. So those are the four types of culture, of landscapes, excuse me. And if you have any questions right now, we're going to just pause for just a second because we're just going to take a pause. And we're back. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. All right, so we're going to locate and describe a cultural landscape that's important to you and what kind is it. Okay, again, this is much more interactive. I'll consider posting these questions once I get stuff on YouTube. Right now, we're going to move on to our next slide. So there you go. Oh, I'm also going to do around 30 slides a session because that'll take us through this, if not faster. So I'm trying to do 30 slides a session. If you want to do more, let me know. Okay, our next cultural thing, our third wheel in this little cultural circle is the cultural ecology. That's the last cultural part we're going to talk about today. And this studies the relationship between the natural environment and culture. Again, how do the people who live in a certain place adapt to that place and make it part of their own instead of deriding it or being miserable, which I'm sure they were in the beginning, but how to make it theirs, how to walk into some place that seems utterly frightening and make it home, like my classroom. So that's what cultural ecology is. All right, moving on. And again, there are four schools of thought, and some of these terms have been mentioned before. Environmental determinism, we've spoken of before. Possibilism or environmental possibilism, if your vocabulary has it that way. Environmental perception, and then cultural determinism. And what these are all sort of, if you take a second and look at them, actually, yeah, just do that. Just take a second, pause it right here, take a second, look at them, and then tell me in comments, tell me what is different. What sort of progression do you see here? How is there, I don't know, maybe not really a transition model, literally speaking, but per se, how do you see perhaps as a country develops, you might see a change in the schools of thought with relationship to them and their culture. Just take a second. Okay. So we have environmental determinism, which is just that. The culture is dependent, almost at the mercy, to sound overly dramatic, to the environment. And the other part that makes this most transferable across space is that typically similar environments produce similar cultures. So if you are tropical coastal and you are in the Americas, chances are if you are tropical and coastal, there'll be similarities in your culture because regardless of where you are, whether Africa or South America or Southeast Asia, the environment and the geography, especially early on, is going to dictate what you do, how you live, where you live, what you grow, and the materials with which you build, how isolated you are. All those things impact your development. So initially, almost everybody is determined by the environment. Heck, even when the colonists settled here, they didn't know how to farm. They didn't know how to grow crops in sand up north. They didn't know how to deal with mosquitoes in Virginia. And so life was brutal until they were able to overcome that, or at least learn how to cope. Environmental possibilism, is when people begin to realize that what the environment provides them is beneficial, that what the environment provides them is opportunity, that together that they can see this as a way to make more food, to grow more crops, to develop lines of transportation, to develop ways to communicate, and that as settlers or colonists or nations move from stage 2 to stage 3, technology is going to allow them to feel that there is more of a possibility in their lives, that the environment's not quite the bugaboo or the hindrance that it is. The other two, environmental perception, is much more historical, much more tied to culture. It's how we perceive an environment affect the culture. How do we perceive how things look or how things are, and then how does that make us feel about ourselves or about another place? You may assume that because a group of people live in a certain place that they're going to behave a certain way. It's kind of stereotypy, but not. And it is perceptual in that it is taught. Okay, perception, first you see it, and then it's reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. Environmental perception is one reason why Africa is the way it is today, because of the outside perception of Africa as, geographically speaking, as a huge continent, as a diverse continent, as the people within the continent have always been seen, as far as I know in my studies, as a less than, or you go back to Rudyard Kipling and the idea of we must help our little brown brothers, like they are someone who just needs help, and only the white man can provide that help. And those perceptions perpetuate over time, and it's because of believe it or not, it's tied to their environments. It's tied to their geography. Like they live in a desert, or they live in the mountains, or the types of animals, the type of crops they grow, or how they make a living, or the lack of education because of a lack of communication, because of a lack of infrastructure. The geography plays a part in that, and we'll get more into what's under their feet and how what was under all the feet of lots of places in Africa really influenced the situation they're in now, but that's more for Unit 5. And then the final thing is cultural determinism. And this is like the Enlightenment on steroids. This is the Enlightenment going horribly, horribly wrong. Man determines the environment. Our culture, our way of life, any culture's being is far more important than the environment itself. Think about it. We can make it rain, literally make it rain. We can cloud seed, and farmers in the Midwest can make it rain. Now, we can't turn it off yet, I don't believe, but we can turn it on. Now, the consequences of that are, you're altering environment. Remember, we talked about how in Dubai they did a fact-finding check to see if it was worth it to build a mountain. And yes, the purpose of that was to bring rain, I'm sure other things too, but rain to Dubai. But think about and I don't know if their scientists have, I have not done a whole lot of study, but one thing I would hope they would think about is what happens west of that mountain, what happens east of that mountain, all the other places along the way whose weather and whose climate was different is going to be altered potentially by a mountain being stuck right in the middle where there wasn't a mountain prior. So that's cultural determinism. My culture, the American way of life, is the best way of life, or Europe, Africa would only be better according to the French if it was all just a little more French. That sort of arrogance that my culture, because I am stage 4 because I am developed, because I have all these resources, because I have all this. This is the model for everything, and we are going to drive and determine the environment, which I think we're starting to see now. I would argue with the whole COVID-19 thing. When you look at what happened in China when they locked everybody down, when you look at how much we're not driving, how much we're not producing, how much we're not polluting, that there's something to be said for this. All right, now for these next slides, again, we'll just skip over them. Explain the schools of thought that best explain these scenarios. I'll go through them. I want you to take a second and pause and then think about them. And again, if you aren't sure or if you have any questions, you can discuss amongst yourselves in Canvas. You can discuss amongst yourselves and talking points, or group me, whichever device, whichever messaging service you're using. And then again, once I figure out my YouTube channel, you can also do it in comments as well, because I'm new at this too. All right. First one, a small undiscovered community is located on the coast of South America. Heck, you can read. I'll let you read. Okay, so let's think about this as if it was an FRQ or a short answer question, something along those lines. What in this paragraph matters, right? What in this paragraph offers hints into what type of thought goes into this? They are on the coast of South America, they consume fish, they sacrifice to gods who visit wrath upon them. So when you go through these things, find, and this is in any writing, any reading, find the pieces that matter. Even on notes, it's all help, it's all good stuff. Let me know what you think is going on here. That'd be great to hear. All right, section B. What is culture made? Of what is culture made? Cultures are made of habits, and then customs, and then customs become culture. And don't worry about I don't know if you can see my inset or not, but if you can't, great. If you can, we'll go over each of these in just a second, so you'll be fine. In fact, these are the last 3 things that we're going to talk about today. Our notes will end when we go through culture. So we have habits, customs, and cultures. A habit is a repetitive act that an individual performs. If you do it and no one else does it, it's a habit. And I mean no one else does it, it's a habit. A custom is the group with the handshake. Bunch of friends have the same kind of handshake, that's a custom. Taking your, something that's identifying to a particular group. In Europe, the custom of kissing on both cheeks, regardless of male or female. What else? In Japanese culture, taking your shoes off before you enter a building. Those types of things. Those are customs. And then culture is a collection of all these things. So let's move on. Again, there is material cultures. These are the artifacts. These are the things that are made and left behind by people. These are houses, furniture, instruments, books. These are things that we make. Any kind of invention, rocket ships, whatever, submarines, big giant water bottles. I'm down to 1 bottle a day now, by the way. Excuse me. Okay. So these are and there are more examples, but these are examples of material culture. Non-material culture, and these are the things that I think define culture more, because the values, the beliefs, the behaviors and the norms, those types of things, and please make sure you understand what a norm is. These go into, let me try this. These go into the material culture, the things that we make. These go into, what holds value, what means something, what from your environment is going to go into the structures that are built. It's going to go into the idea, like, does education matter? Do roads matter? This is all beliefs and all values that then become transcended, I believe, onto what is made. Now, some of you may believe it's the other way around, that we start making stuff and then we begin to value it, and we value the process that goes into that being made. perhaps. So, we can discuss that too. All right, so we're going to look at these 5 things here, and then we'll go on. We'll call it a day. Actually, we're not. We're going to stop here. All right, so we'll pick up here on Wednesday. I'm going to keep talking, but we'll pick up here on Wednesday. Your notes will begin here because these take a little explaining, and I'm going to try and get some stuff ready for you. All right. Hope that went okay for you. Hope that wasn't too horrible. Let me know kindly how to do it better and what can help out. And I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Take care, everybody.